All right. Well, welcome to the Abstract Machine podcast. Today we have with us Anthony Stucky. Anthony and I are classmates at San Diego State University. We're both working on our master's thesis in philosophy. Anthony and I have a few things in common. We both have an interest in continental approaches to social, political, philosophical problems. We both have a deep appreciation for the intersection of philosophy with culture and film. And most importantly, we are allies in a losing battle against heavily dominated analytic philosophy departments that have little to no room for alternative approaches to social philosophical problems. Welcome to the podcast, Anthony. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Mario.
Excellent. Good to hear. So why don't we start with some fun little questions? Like, why don't we start by getting to know you a little bit? I always tell people, the people in my head, obviously, because I don't talk to real people. I always say, that you don't need to debate whether philosophy is right for you or not as a life pursuit or academic pursuit or whatever. You do not find philosophy. Philosophy finds you. In other words, philosophy is somewhat of the only choice for some of us. That being said, what led you to philosophy?
What led me to philosophy? That's a good question. Well, I
What
too
what lines
contain.
of flight? What lines of flight did you have to take to end up here? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I too contain multitudes. We
Yeah,
we came to philosophy through many
there we go.
different paths. I suppose back after I graduated high school and I was taking courses was my first interaction with philosophy at Palomar College. And I knew then that there was something very interesting about it, even though that wasn't my main field of study. Um, and here in the United States, most of us don't have access to philosophy or really hear much about it other than perhaps Plato or Aristotle in passing or in some funny film, like Bill and Ted, where they talk about Socrates, things like this.
Socrates.
Yeah, and
I've
it's
heard of
not.
him.
Yeah. I think a few of us have, right? It's something about examining your life. Um, so I think it's something to do with our culture in general and what's really important to us and what's pushed upon us, and then maybe gaining some life experience and starting to hit a stage in life where we reflect and think about things and think about what makes our life worth living. And perhaps some of us don't get to that point. Maybe some of us get there earlier, later through different means, but I suppose this is a very long-winded way of saying philosophy and I have been acquainted for some time, but it wasn't until somewhat recently when we joined this master's program together, you and I did, what, a year and a half ago?
Mm-hmm.
Something to that
Yep.
nature. And that was because I found a lot of time on my hands due to my material conditions. I was in a pretty intense motor vehicle accident, and that forces you to really think about life in a different way, I think, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
And so for your undergrad, you studied what did you study for your undergrad?
I studied business and marketing, which is
Mm-hmm.
perhaps why I'm so interested in propaganda and the intersection of media and culture and philosophy in that regard.
Right. And you worked in that field too for a while.
I did. After graduation, I worked in a marketing communications department. I worked for a couple larger companies. I worked for a nonprofit hospital, and it was interesting. But in the end, I realized what I didn't want to do, which is sometimes just as important, right? At least that's
Right.
what I tell myself.
Um, you've worked a bunch of different jobs throughout your life. Weren't you also what do they call them? EMT or nurse or whatever or ambulance paramedic? Weren't you that at some point?
Yeah, I was. I have worked a lot of jobs. I wrote them down once and I thought, wow, that is kind of startling. But I was an electrician at one point. I worked as an auto mechanic at one point, but mostly I've spent most of my time working in restaurants, opening restaurants, working in the business side of business. And then, yeah, restaurants weren't doing so well around COVID, so I had to do something to make money. And so I worked on ambulances for a few years. I even thought about maybe turning that into a career, and I went to a fire academy, but again, realized that probably wasn't the path for me.
So
But it was
so
very interesting.
so you got to see like you were actually on the job, like you got to see like dead people and like whatever. I don't know what else you see in that job, like
All
nasty
sorts,
stuff. Just
yeah, all
the
sorts of stuff.
real material composition of humanity, blood and guts and violence.
Certainly.
I don't
Yeah,
know what
certainly
else.
a lot of people at their worst or having their worst days or in a very difficult situation. A lot of my first days on the job were pretty intense. My first shift at a hospital, I did CPR on someone multiple times and they came in and out of life and finally went away. And one of my first 911 paramedic jobs, was like multiple stabbings in a new situation I wasn't
Jeez.
familiar with. So you
Yeah.
definitely find yourself testing your situational awareness really quick.
Do they prepare you for that? Like, do you feel like you prepare well for to encounter someone with multiple stabbings or somebody that's about to lose his life, or is it you just jump into it and you just deal with it in the moment?
You know, you're I would say that the medical profession is really good at drilling you on training on repetitions, right?
Mm,
But that only gets you so far, you know?
right,
And I will say overall, in general, in this society that we're a part of, I found it rather strange at times that there's so little training required for so many of these jobs that we deem important, such as
right,
teaching our youth or taking care of people who are in an emergency situation and things of this.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, doesn't it seem like their main priority for employers is not so much to get you ready to do your best at your job, but rather just to get you on the clock, just to get you to be another set of hands, just to be just to keep the machine functioning, so that people are getting paid, things are getting done, even if they're not getting done at their best. But you just keep the machine going.
Such as the, like you referred to it, the machine or the way that we live our life. Yeah, this method that we've crafted for ourselves that we live inside of. We seem to, whether we reflect on it or not, value efficiency at pretty much all costs. That's for certain. Efficiency and productivity. What are we producing? I'm not
Right.
quite sure, but
Which is so interesting, right? And I think that this conversation is going to lead us into your thesis. But which is so interesting, like what is all this efficiency for? Like, what is it for if it is not for us? If it is not for the individuals necessarily, what is it for? Like, it almost seems like, when you have, there's this idea of like, kind of like intelligence and complexity, such as like, people talk about intelligence in like ant colonies, like where you get a bunch of ants and people say on their own each little ant is like not intelligent or not in a complex way anyway, but you get a collection of them and they do some pretty impressive things. And so we like to think that we are, obviously that's not who we are. We have this radical subjectivity. We do philosophy, we do, and we do, I'm not denying that, but at the same time on the collective we seem to also kind of work towards something that doesn't seem to have like direct benefit for us necessarily, like we're just like making sure that things are efficient for, not for us, for some sort of like ominous ambiguous future, at which sometimes it even just seems to be like, for example, like artificial intelligence, right? Even the experts, even the proponents of artificial intelligence, they, whether they're right or wrong, a lot of them will not deny the idea that artificial intelligence is going to change things radically. And in the best utopian cases, artificial intelligence is, someone like Elon Musk will say like, oh yeah, artificial general intelligence is great because once it's here, we won't have to work. We'll just get a paycheck from the government, and things will be great. It's like, okay, well, that's how it's gonna work out. That just the government's, because we're not gonna have to work. The government's gonna give us checks. When right now they're fighting for a couple dollars for SNAP, giving people a couple dollars a day. But somehow in this utopia, we're gonna get a paycheck, universal basic income or whatever, and we're not gonna have to do anything about it. Okay, great. That's the optimistic view. On the pessimistic or maybe realistic view, some people, even proponents of AI, say, um, AI is going to change things radically. It is going to disrupt the market economy and jobs and whatnot. And yeah, it's going to put a lot of people out of the the job market, and a lot of jobs are going to be eliminated. And they do acknowledge that there is somewhat of a dystopian element to artificial intelligence, right? Nevertheless, they acknowledge that possibility. And nevertheless, they still say, well, but it still feels like a necessity. It still feels like a demand. Like we have to do this. And it's like, for what? Why? We're acknowledging the possibilities that this is not like we cannot see the positive necessarily for humanity. We cannot see the positives for humanity. Why are we doing it? So anyway, so that's my little take on artificial intelligence, and we'll get a little more into it once we get into your thesis because I think that there's connections to it. Uh, but yeah, why don't you tell us just the some of the main kind of like some of the main ideas in your thesis, so something that you're still working on. Um, but you can either give us your thesis in one sentence, or you can just start to kind of give us a little bit of the context or the background for it.
Sure. Yeah, I suppose we were kind of skirting some ways, one way into this conversation that I'm trying to create here. Perhaps can be said when we have this idea of efficiency towards progress, towards some sort of future, and you say perhaps it's not for us, and we have this strange disconnect perhaps between the limited resources we have on our planet and making efficient use of them, for us, and us being largely humanity as a species and not anyone else. What does this do when it seems like it perhaps isn't good for the real people that are participating in this system, but
The
maybe,
real people and the ecology,
yeah,
like the planet.
yeah, absolutely. That's a whole nother conversation,
Yeah.
definitely. Um, so perhaps there's this idea that we, individual human people, um, are one type of thing that has one type of need or desire, and then there is um, the population as another sort of thing that has, a need or a desire. And maybe there's some sort of disconnect between these two things. Foucault would talk about it, and he talks about, biopower and the two levels that it works on in that regard. And then someone like Levinas would perhaps talk about it as the difference between justice and ethics,
Mm-hmm.
and ethics being something that is a one-to-one relation, an ethical relation between
Mm-hmm.
two individuals, and justice being something where we necessarily have to abstract an individual and categorize them and make sense of them so that we can, weigh costs and benefits and make choices for the greater population at large. And perhaps when we get very, very efficient and we abstract the individuality of people more and more and more, and we let it harden and crystallize into something that seems natural or seems inevitable, maybe there's some issues there.
Right. So does Levinas does Levinas propose a way of Because it seems like he's saying that we need both, right? We need justice and we need ethics. And what I'm understanding is that justice is kind of like the collective approach. It's not ideal because justice does not take into account singularity in particular cases and situations. But we nevertheless we need a sort of like a set of rules, and we need like a system to make our lives practical and functional. We need red lights. We need rules and regulations, even though they're not perfect, but we need them nevertheless. Ethics, on the other hand, it kind of works at the individual level, at the singular level, and that's a better relationship, right? That's ultimately the ideal relationship that we wish we could have towards every single person, treating them as unique in their own situation, in their own cases. Does Levinas have a way of mediating both of those positions, or is it ultimately for Levinas? Is it ultimately the goal to get us past the systematic approaches of justice towards the singular, towards the ethical?
No, there's no pass and there's no one or the other. For Levinas, justice is necessary and it's mandatory. It's something that has to happen. And in fact, for him, it's any time that the third person enters the equation at all, right? So three people or more, like justice comes into effect because at one moment, if I'm in conversation with one other individual in an ethical relationship, where I'm not subsuming them under my categories. And I know we're kind of getting ahead and haven't really discussed any of this. But the moment that there's another person, I have to weigh now who do I give priority to in this situation? Let's say, for instance, a concrete example, I know you and I know our friend Matt. And I
Mm-hmm.
see the two of you, and I have a relation with both of you, and the two of you are in an altercation. Right now, I have to choose. I can't be ethical to both of you. I can't choose. So, I mean, justice already comes into the equation now, let alone when we're talking about cities, neighborhoods, nations,
Mm-hmm.
states, global, millions and millions of people that we have to weigh these things for.
Right.
So, I think the point is that there's not. First of all, he's not going to be prescriptive in any way in his ethical account. His ethics is a phenomenology. So, what it is like to encounter the other person, what it is like to be ethical, and basically his argument for ethics as first philosophy. So, before we have ontology, before we have traditional metaphysics, we are already responsible for the other person. So, there's a sense of responsibility that comes prior to us understanding things in an intelligible way, or that is anterior to or that founds our ability to understand the world.
Right. So, so what are you supposed to do in that situation? You're friends with me and Matt, and we get into a fight, and obviously that I'm way cooler than Matt. What are you supposed to do? What would Levinas tell you to do? Or
Well, again, he's not going to be prescriptive. He's not going to tell us, and there's no system to his ethics. He's not saying here's a pragmatic system. This is not Kant's deontology. This is not Aristotle's virtue ethics. This is not, Mill and Bentham. This isn't anything to this effect. This is
right.
simply,
But say you're Levinas. What do you do in that situation? Because we find ourselves in those simple but pragmatic and real situations all the time.
well,
What
I
would
will
Levinas
say
do?
this is that we have systems of justice and we weigh pros and cons in general. And what makes these systems, or perhaps what he would argue, is that the best way to, asymptotically approach justice, kind of like in a mathematical equation, since, you have a background in mathematics, let's talk about
Right.
like limits and functions in calculus as they approach a certain number. So we're
Mm-hmm.
never going to hit that
I
number.
like
We're
that.
never going to have a justice system that is ethical. So what can we do? Well, let's try to get as close as we can. And how do we do this? I think perhaps he might argue that we need to remember that justice, understanding, and all of these systems, these totalizing systems that we create to make sense of our world and make things more just, are all founded on ethics. So when we forget that and we don't revisit that, we take ourselves away from it and it won't be as close. So we need to remember that. We need to
Right.
listen to the other and we need to remember that the other isn't something that I can consume under my categories. The other is radically other. It is the infinite other, the other with a capital O.
Right. Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to get you to say, uh,
Okay.
unfairly, which obviously it's not. This is my assumption. My assumption is that the justice, in a practical sense, kind of resorts to fall into a categorical imperative mode. Obviously, acknowledging that, like you said, with the limits. Obviously, acknowledging that that is not a perfect. It is not going to be a perfect mathematical calculation, but is that ultimately how one would go about through justice, how one would go about making decisions in a sort of categorical imperative way?
Well, there's the way that we do things now. And I think that if we were to take a look at the world in general, we tend to take a very utilitarian approach. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that at
Yep.
a large scale, this probably makes sense. And I think that in general, the classical philosophical ethical systems that we use are probably pretty scalar when we look at it. And that, it's more difficult to take a virtue ethics or a Kantian deontological approach when we have to weigh large decisions, like for instance, in Britain, when they have where they have universal healthcare run by their government. They have things called these QALYs, which are quality adjusted life years. And so they literally have to do, a numerical quantitative analysis on, how much is this person's arm worth? Or, how many, like they're
Right.
limited resources, right? Is
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
one newborn infant worth
Right.
eight 80-year-old humans' lives, right? Things of
Mm-hmm.
this nature. So I think that we already do this. We already abstract people to this degree because perhaps in some ways it's very necessary, right?
Mm-hmm.
And again, Levinas isn't going to give us any prescriptions. I might suggest that some prescription would be to be able to build into these systems some sort of recursive, type of function to where there's a certain percentage of cases where we have to visit with a clinician in a medical setting or, with an instructor in a pedagogical setting or whatever institution we're talking about, where we visit a certain amount of cases in a one-on-one basis so that we can make the system better and constantly upgrade it in real time as it, becomes and hopefully approaches a more ethical way of functioning.
Right. No, that's great. That's a great answer because I mean, ultimately, you know, uh, it may not be the mainstream view that philosophy needs to be, practical life, and that philosophy needs to be always connected to practice and to everyday life. But I think you and I share that view that ultimately we don't want our approach to philosophy to just be an intellectual exercise in metaphysics or in ethics that can perhaps never be find the ground in practical life praxis or whatever.
Yeah, it's fun to play in the playground sometimes, right?
Sure.
In the theoretical
Yep.
playground.
And
But
sometimes
after
you need
you
it. And
Yeah,
sometimes you
and
need.
sometimes you
Sometimes
do
you need
need
it.
it.
Right.
Absolutely. But after a while, and you have, I like to think of it like you kind of have no surfaces, right? With any traction to gain up there. And so eventually you want to be able to tangibly, hold on to something and build something from that. I
Right.
think. Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. Exactly. No, I think that's a really good way to start. I know that we're talking about your thesis, and so we can probably make it more precise. But and so we just jumped straight into to metaphysics and ethics, which is fine because that kind of sets up the background for kind of like the more specific shape of your thesis. So why don't you just, if you have it in one sentence, why don't you give us your what is it that you're trying to prove, or what is it that you're trying to show in your the claim you're making in your thesis?
The claim I'm making in my thesis would be something to the effect that what we have today in, let's say, contemporary society is a capitalistic system that functions on efficiency. And in doing so, efficiency sure seems to be at odds with Levinasian view of ethics, and I think what most of us just kind of feel intrinsically to be true, and that, especially in this country, many people feel like this system isn't really working for them, don't they? So perhaps this system we've created to be efficient isn't very ethical. So my issue has been throughout our program of study trying to find hope, trying to find positivity at the end of things that I write, right? Professors are constantly asking me, okay, so what's the hopeful twist at the end? And I
Mm,
find it difficult to fake one of those. But
yeah.
perhaps I found one in Levinas, which is why I find him interesting, is that hearing the ethical call of the other is not up to you, right? Um, we're these ego-driven individuals, especially in modern, neoliberal society, and we like to consume and we enjoy consuming and it feels good. And we have this sort of spontaneous freedom, this sovereignty that's in question. But when we really feel the other, the face of the other, the call of the other person, that in our consumption, it means that they don't get to consume, right? Um, we kind of feel bad about it. We have shame about it, and we start to question our lifestyle and really what we're doing. And I think Levinas allows us to do that. So that definitely wasn't what you asked me for.
It's
But
it
maybe in one
it's
sentence, Levinas allows me to find some hope in late stage capitalism for us to hear the ethical call of the other still. Let's say that.
right.
Yeah.
And I'll ask you a little bit more about Levinas, Levinas's concept of the face, one of his most important concepts in a little bit. But and I think you do answer. You're answering the questions. We in philosophy we don't always we're not the best at taking linear approaches. And in all honesty, those linear approaches, sure, they're great when you're doing certain things, but for conversation, I mean, come on. I don't. If I want a linear approach, I talk to ChatGPT. That's not what I need. That's not what makes conversations interesting.
Yes,
So
one of the simulations of the other that we have today going for
yeah,
us.
there we go. Um, so so capitalism. What is why is capitalism such a threat to humanity, or why is it such a challenge to Levinas, or how is Levinas in a great position to allow us to see the problems with capitalism? And
Sure.
you already mentioned you mentioned the concept of the face in Levinas, which is for people that are not familiar, the concept of the face plays a big role for Levinas, and it is not completely straightforward. It's not exactly that. It's just the face for Levinas means an actual, what do you call it, the plasticity of the face, the shape of the face. It is not necessarily. It is not that, but it's not exclusively only that. So so yeah. Why don't you just give us a couple lines of what Levinas, why the face plays an important role, and kind of roughly what he means by it.
Sure. Well, first on the background for the capitalism, I suppose, would be his work that I'm working with mostly is called Totality and Infinity. And, by totality, I would associate that with capitalism and that it is something that absorbs our individuality, right? It treats our uniqueness, our unique human individuality, our subjects as resources and kind of simulates our difference within the sameness. And then for Leonas's face, which is certainly a complex and yet not at all a concept for him. We think of a face and we think about the face of the other person, right? Eyes, nose, a mouth, right? And there's a face. There's some cheeks, and they look at me. And for him, we can take this pretty literally a lot of the times, and he'll oscillate between it being literal and metaphorical. And I think that this is very much on purpose, because mostly he does mean the face, and he uses examples like the eyes of the other when the other looks at me, right? And through the eyes of the other, the third person in all of the world is already present. Justice is there in the eyes of the other. So literally, he does mean face a lot, right? We see someone on the street and they're sitting on the curb, for a concrete example, and maybe they're panhandling and they're having a rough time, and we immediately look at them and we categorize them, right? We say, here's a homeless person, and maybe we ascribe some reasons for them, being unhoused or what have you, right? Maybe they made poor choices, or maybe this, maybe that, maybe they deserve it, maybe they deserve our sympathy, whatever. But then that person turns and they look at us. And in that moment, we can't necessarily completely categorize them, right? Something evades our descriptions. And we feel kind of shame, and we feel like there's something about them that we can't completely understand. And I think that that's kind of what he means by the face addressing us. And it doesn't necessarily need to be the actual face. There's a famous example where he talks about the nape of the neck, but it's something that shows as face for him. And perhaps that can be an animal, like Derrida will like to say with his cat.
Mm,
Perhaps that could be an ecosystem. Perhaps that could be something else.
mm,
Not for Levinas. For Levinas, it's just a human. But the
mm.
face is something that calls our spontaneous freedom into account. It makes us feel shame, and it makes us feel very strange. Like, who is this other that I can't completely understand and assimilate under my categories, you know?
Right. And what seems to be so dangerous about capitalism, and not even so much capitalism, but the ideology that accompanies capitalism, right? Is that it precisely provides us with the narrative, something that uh, people like Zizek would call fantasy. The capitalism comes with the narrative, with the fantasy, with the narrative that, when we encounter a face or when we encounter the other in a lower position than us, we hear that call. We hear that we get this that feeling of discomfort, this sense of responsibility of like, wow, I have so much more than this person. Uh, these days in every place, almost every city has plenty of homelessness, and you encounter them almost everywhere you go, and they're asking for money. And I think what's so dangerous about capitalism is not so much capitalism as a purely economic system that is efficient or whatever, but the ideology that goes along with it, which is that capitalism allows you, when you hear that the call of conscience, when you feel that guilt, that you have so much more than the person that's asking you for money. What capitalism does so well is that it provides us with the quick narrative that says, but why should I care? Why should I help this person, right? I got it out, I succeeded on my own. In a capitalistic society, everybody has the same opportunities to succeed. So the logical implication is, if you're not succeeding, it's because it's your own fault. It's your own failure, and it reflects something about you, your lack of ambition, your lack of motivation, and you just want to be a leech. You basically just want to take from my hard work. And that's how people provide themselves with the narrative that they say, well, that is my justification why I shouldn't feel bad about it. Would you agree with that assessment? The rationale of the capitalistic mindset?
Sure. I think that on many accounts that the American dream that we're sold is one that is founded in meritocracy, right? Like it is something that I've earned. It is the bootstrap mentality. And it's something that I've earned as this sovereign individual with no help from others. It's not that I happen to be born, in the richest country in the
Right.
world, in the history of the world at this certain point in time, right? Or that, I have all these advantages going for me.
Or that I was born into a lot of money. Like,
Yeah.
I was born into a rich family, and so my starting point is not going to be the same as a person, as a person that didn't have the same opportunities already.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And yet we certainly um, integrate this sense of that we've earned our position, or that
Right.
we've earned our right to consume, that we've earned our place in this world by whatever metrics we're sold, basically. Yeah.
Right. And just real quick, and I think that that's the fantasy, right? That's what I call the fantasy, or Shishakins call the fantasy. And I think that that's the dialectical aspect of the fantasy, because more often than not, we uh, in ideology critique studies, we focus on kind of like the negative connotations or consequences of the fantasy, which the fantasy allows us to cover up some traumatic real kernel that people say, some discomforts about life, something that does not fit, and so we provide a narrative to make sense of things. Um, and so in this case, in capitalism, we provide ourselves a narrative of like, well, I shouldn't feel bad because I worked for it, I earned it, and it's mine, and they're not getting theirs because they're not working for it. On the other hand, and I fully agree that that's just obviously I think that that's the wrong fantasy. It's the wrong narrative. It is obviously incorrect in so many ways that we just as we just pointed out. But the opposite side, the positive side, if you will, of the fantasy is also we cannot ignore it. It also has a power, right? Like, if you're being optimistic about this capitalistic mindset, we can say, well, on the other hand, like, it does allow some people, like, that fantasy does motivate some people to perhaps strive towards something that if they didn't have that belief, they would have never achieved it, right? So I think it is interesting how the fantasy can play both roles, right? But yeah, by and large, not
What are you
all
striving towards, and
not
for what end? And
not all fantasies are created equal. There are some that are worse than others, clearly.
yeah, there might be something there to connect to Levinas too, with this idea between desires and needs, right?
Hmm.
And perhaps that this is a way to connect the fantasy to something that we have this feeling for desire, and we keep trying to substitute something, right, with the fantasy that is the end of that desire. And then
Hmm.
when we seem to finally possess that thing that we've put, right, that carrot at the end of the stick, that feeling of desiring doesn't really go away, right? It's just replaced with a new fantasy. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's more or less kind of like the Object Patia by Lacan, from
Okay.
Lacan. Yeah, which is, there are some similarities with the Levinas's notion of desire, but also some differences. So with capitalism, that's what you see. That so capitalism, because it's a totality. That's what you see the problem with capitalism, because it aims to eliminate all differences. It aims to subsume politics, rationalizes institutions, and it turns them into instruments of totality, right? And so, especially from a Levinasian perspective, how how are we supposed to how are we supposed to hear the call of the other in a
Yeah,
place where everybody
that's
seems to be doing well, whereas it seems like nobody needs help, right? Virtually, obviously.
does it seem like that? I'm not so
Well,
sure.
but I'm saying that's the fantasy.
That's the
Like, that's
fantasy.
that's the
Okay, okay.
fantasy. Yeah.
Sure, right. And perhaps we can even use modern technology or social media, and we can say that people present, their themselves, their plastic face, right, to the world, their anonymous face, not their real individual identity selves, um, as projections that don't need any help, right, that are doing just fine.
Right.
So that might exacerbate this situation as well. The key, I think, is that one does not choose to hear the call of the other. And that's going to be super important. And that's maybe where I find the most hope is that regardless of how selfish and egoism or egoistic our drives are becoming, right? This threat of basically enclosing our world in an economy of the same, he would say, one that we enjoy ourselves and we live from the elements of the world. We live, from the light and the ocean and the resources that we have. And we enjoy consuming, and our body feels good about it, almost hedonistic. It's really easy to forget that all of this precipitates there being an other person for anything of this to make sense for us. So, how do we hear the call of the other? Well, it's that pit in your stomach. It's that feeling of shame that you get when you least expect it. That's when you encounter the face. That's when you hear the call of the other, is when you can't quite understand the other person that is there, that you're actually, he would say, you're in conversation with, regardless of if you're speaking words, if you're having vocal utterances or not. You'd be in conversation with them because he has this difference between the saying and the said. And the saying is this, is actually being with someone. Like, for instance, a concrete example, I'm having a conversation with someone and I'm looking at them in their eyes, and they walk away, and you come up to me and you say, "Hey, what color was that person's eyes?" And I say, "I have no idea." It's because we were just in conversation. It wasn't the content, it wasn't their actual plastic face that arrested me, right? It was there was something about them as a unique individual, right? Something about them as being radically other, about being infinite, about overflowing all of these categories, right? I can't just say, well, it was this girl and she goes to San Diego State and she was this tall and she studies this thing and now I know everything about her. No, there was more to it. There was something more. And regardless of how many categories I have, and regardless of how I wanted to understand this other person, there's always going to be more. And I think that that's his idea of infinity, is regardless of how many categories we could choose to ascribe to understand this unique individual in front of us that we're in conversation with, there would always be more. And he
I love
steals
that.
this from Descartes, from Meditations 3,
Hmm.
this idea of God and the infinite within us. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. I love that view by Levinas. That's a great take. So so there, do you? It seems like, and I think we might have already touched on it, but there is a paradox that you see with capitalism. It is a paradox that it seems like capitalism satisfies needs, which is efficiency, convenience, while at the same time it obstructs desire, which is that infinite relation with the other. So can you spell that out just a little bit more for us?
Sure. I think there's two things. There's one, there's going to be the difference between need and desire. And then two, there's going to be almost two stages for us to be ethical. So first, like need and desire. So for Levinas, he's going to differentiate these things between need and desire. So desire is this feeling that we have for something that truly lies outside of ourself, right? So we have all these categories of understanding. We already live in the world, right? And we enjoy ourselves and we understand things make sense to us in a very Heideggerian way, right? Like there's this network of tools and functions. And, I walk through a door without having to tell myself, hey, put your hand on the handle and open the door, right? I just go through it very naturally.
Mm-hmm.
Everything exists as if it's for me, right? The world is my
Right.
oyster. I float through it and everything makes sense. Like it's at my disposal. I can command, I can consume. Here I go.
Mm-hmm.
But this is going to get like really bored, and this is where existentialists, right, come into play, and we have
Right.
this tedium vitae and this ennui, and if there's nothing new under the sun, what are you living for, right? Like what
Right.
really where's the marrow of life here? So we have this feeling that
It's like
regardless,
the it's like
huh?
the myth. It's like the myth of Sisyphus, right? You just keep pushing the boulder up the hill over and over again.
Yeah, it seems like a pretty bleak existence, doesn't it?
Or
Regardless of
it's like the
yeah.
eternal return in Nietzsche. It's like God, that sounds awful.
Yeah, regardless of how Camus would want to say that Sisyphus enjoys, looking at the lines of his boulder, I think for the most of us, we read it at its face value in the Greek myth that's a
Jeez,
pretty terrible fate.
that's
Yeah,
that,
but
that's what he says. Like that Sisyphus enjoys the pushing the boulder up.
it's something to the effect of one must imagine Sisyphus happy or something on these lines.
That's great.
Yeah, I don't remember. It's been a little while
Hey, if
since.
somebody makes a charge that French theorists are not optimistic, there's at least a little bit of proof that they can be.
Well, I mean, it's certainly absurd. I don't know about
Yeah,
optimistic, but certainly like to laugh and enjoy at our situation.
yeah, sense of
Um,
humor, right? Yeah, I mean they're
yeah,
that
yeah,
big on
I
sense
mean,
of humor.
yeah, perhaps what else is there?
Yeah, yeah,
Rather than realize the ridiculousness of our existence.
yeah,
Um,
and maybe they're not separate. But
yeah.
sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh, it's okay. I think we were talking about need and desire, but
Yep,
the,
yep.
the long story short is that we have a desire for something that is not in our understanding, right? That is truly novel. And this is one of the things that I personally think that capitalism does a very good job at simulating. And I'd like to bring Baudrillard in later in my thesis and whatnot. But we like to simulate novelty, right? We have brand new TV shows coming out all the time, new movies, new this, new that, or it all seems new. Perhaps it's the exact same story shown with a new veneer, probably. However, we manufacture this sense of novelty, these things that we can consume as if they're going to fill that desire that we have for something outside of ourselves. And really, it feels like diminishing returns to me, right? Like the pool in your backyard or the brand new car that you get, a month later, it certainly doesn't feel as if it's as novel anymore, right? So what Levinas is talking about is true novelty, true desire for something that lies outside of me, for something that I can't bring under my categories. Because the second I bring it under my categories and I understand it, it's not going to be truly novel anymore. There it is. I understand it. I get it. Now it's in my pocket. Now I possess it as an understanding. The end. So
I
what he
see.
wants is desire for something truly outside us, which we're going to find in the other person that overflows our categories, versus
So
need. And need is something that we consume
yeah.
and that fills our need. For instance, I'm hungry, I eat bread, my need is filled, right? I'm sated. I'm thirsty, I drink water, my thirst is quenched. So that's pretty much the difference between need and desire there.
So need by definition is not well. So there really is nothing in reality that is new. So nothing's gonna count as new. Well, except for the other, which is it always escapes. There's that infinity, right? As we were saying, there's always a surplus. You can never encompass all of the other. There's always this infinity that will transcend, every category, every attempt at rationalizing it, every attempt at conceptualizing it. So basically and that's what you're saying, that capitalism is so good at providing what did you call it, illusion of novelty.
Yeah, I like to think of it as
Simulation
simulation.
of
You could think
novelty.
of it as an illusion or perhaps a representation.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly a consumable simulation of this desire for real novelty. And we're provided very, Adorno and Horkheimer like with the culture industry that understands our psychology to a level that I don't think most of us realize. And really allows us to consume probably these fantasies, like you're talking about in a Lacanian sense,
Right.
these carrots at the end of the stick that we think will fulfill this desire, and then once
Mm-hmm.
we consume it, we still have that empty feeling in us, don't we? Or that longing,
Right.
perhaps, for something that lies outside of us.
Right. So we can say, so is the other the only source of novelty for Levinas?
It is. Yep. The human other person for Levinas is
Mm-hmm.
the only source of infinity because the other person harbors a secret. There's something inside of them, an ultimate shallowness, basically. There's something about you, even probably from yourself, right? I
Yeah.
mean, in a Freudian sense, right? A subconscious type of sense. There's something that I probably don't understand about myself and never will, that every,
Right.
yeah, right? Like there's something there that no matter what, even if you told me every detail of your life, right? And we hung out every day for the rest of our lives, and you told me all of your secrets,
you,
right?
you know you know
Like
I
I don't know
laugh.
if I'd totally be able to
Right.
owe you at the end of our lives. And so
Well,
that's the
yeah.
ultimate source for him, right?
Yeah. I laugh because at some point, uh, I forget the conversation, the context of the conversation, and oh yeah, you were giving a talk in to our class, philosophy 650, and you were like, "Oh yeah, I know you, and I know you," and you pointed at me, and I said, "Well, do you really know me?" And you said something like, "Well, I know that you're a multiplicity, and you have a secret inside of you." And when you said the secret, I was like, okay, that's kind of weird. I don't know. I don't know what you mean by that. So now that you're explaining that secret, it actually makes more sense. It gives a lot more context. Because when you said it, I was like, a secret? What the fuck are we
Secret?
talking
What is
about?
this? The
But
ultimate ultima latet, he will say. Yeah, yeah.
that's great. That was great. Okay. Okay. So, I mean, something that I cannot help but notice that um, there's a little bit of a there's a little bit of a flavor of Platonic uh, Platonism in
He's
that
in
notion.
conversation with Plato throughout Totality Infinity for
Is that
certain.
right? Okay.
Oh yeah, the idea.
I mean, because it seems like everything in reality, except for the other, right? Okay, everything in reality is simulation, right? Copies of copies of the forms for Plato. But ultimately, the real thing is kind of like the forms. So I guess the parallel I was trying to draw was between how everything's just copies of the essences for Plato, and it seems like for I don't know if Levinas says this or you're the one saying it, that novelty is not in any material instantiation in reality, but it's rather in the always remainder, the always surplus of the other.
That type of true novelty, I'm trying to
Right.
make the case personally for. I think perhaps you could have a sense of novelty in like the very Kierkegaardian, like, um, novelty seeking as in like a need, right? Like I want to experience this new thing and go out and party and meet new people and go travel, and like you can consume those type of novel
Right.
experiences, like try
Yeah.
new
Yeah.
foods, these types of things, do check things off your bucket list perhaps, right? And
Right.
in a
Right.
way you consume those experiences as a need though. So at the
Are
end of the
you
day, this
when
is
you
never
say,
going to
yeah? Sorry. Go ahead.
it's just never going to be the same type of novelty as the desire, the true novelty.
Right. When you say Kierkegaard, are you thinking of I think it's the essay Either or, where he
Yeah.
talks about the rotation method?
Yeah. I
Is that
love
what you're
that
thinking?
show.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's
But
a
I'm
great
largely
essay.
talking about, yeah, stages on Life Way, and then A, right? Basically he's for
Right.
himself and he's seeking all these. Yeah, the crop rotation is a great.
Yeah, the crop rotation. Yeah, yeah. It's a. I'm not big on Kierkegaard, but I do like that essay. And I think that's also a really good essay because he talks about memory. He talks about how is it that we remember things, and it almost has a little bit of a flavor of the fantasy. Like he says, the memory is basically a process of selection of remembering things we want to remember, and he says, I think he calls that poetic remembering. He says, and what's dangerous with poetic memory is that we're so selective because we want to remember things in this really ideal situation, and we want to forget all the unpleasant details, right? And
Yeah, that's
so,
certainly true, isn't it? I think.
yeah, so and I think that's very similar to the fantasy. We want to see things in this kind of like we want this narrative to kind of make sense for us in this kind of like ideal situation, and just kind of like, you know, sweep the unpleasant aspects of it under the rug.
And the
But so
narrative certainly
yeah,
does something for us, right? That's more than just problem solving. Like
who?
it's something like the narrative, like a
Yeah,
narrative in general, right? Like what does a narrative do for us
right,
as humans? Like there's got to be something qualitative. I mean, I'm just spitballing here, but
right.
about it that it fills in for us. Because if not, it would just be a quantitative like problem solving, right? But we need
Right.
something more to paper over to make it feel full, I think. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think you said that really well. I think that that's really close to the what they mean by the fantasy. The and they kind of sometimes use it synonymously with the narrative or they call it the fundamental narrative or the fundamental fantasy. Um.
Everyone's
Okay.
got these great ideas on pulling the past, right? Like with us and how we do that. Like um,
Who does?
you were talking about Kierkegaard,
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah,
Talking about
yeah.
memory, and then Proust has that great, the metaphor with walking on stilts, and Heidegger
Mm,
stretching our being through time. And anyway,
right.
there's always this fun element that philosophers like to play with there. Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, some philosophers, right? The minority of philosophers, because as I was saying in the intro, we're allies in the battle against analytic philosophy, which is by and large, ahistorical. They, for them, history is just something that's in the way of getting analytic statements, perfect eternal definitions that will work for our philosophy. So, so the people that we like are, they're more friendly, they're open, they play with not only different temporalities but also elements of history that play a crucial role in understanding the world.
Yeah, different types of epistemologies. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Totally. So,
Okay, so yeah, that was the desire and need, right? And
yep.
then we were talking about capitalism, and I
Mm-hmm.
suppose maybe the second thing that I wanted to say was that there's two stages on this way of being ethical, and that
Mm-hmm.
one of the ways that capitalism, on its face, one thing that it does really well for us potentially being ethical in an ethical relationship with others, is that first we have to be a self at all to be able to be in conversation, to be in an ethical relationship with another person. So to be a self at all for Levinas, you have to first stand out as a self. So you have to be a unique individual, and to be a unique individual, right? To have a psychism, to have an interiority. He'll talk about interiority and exteriority. So to be able to say, I am me, this thing here, I am I, right? To have an I self in a Cartesian way, the capital I. We have to first live from the elements. And by the elements, he means, the earth, the resources that we have, light, sea, air, bread, right? So we have to first be able to make a quote unquote home, which is another thing like the face that he'll use metaphorically, but also very realistically. We have to be able to gather ourself up, our
Mm-hmm.
life's contents, right? The things that we enjoy, the things that we live from, in order to have like a stable sense of a home, a place to be from, a place to possess things, and a place to make sure that we're like secure against the morrow, he'll say. So like the uncertainty of tomorrow, right? Like tomorrow, the market, like as a concrete example, like the stock market might crash, or, the grain that I grew may rot, or whatever, something bad might happen. So I need to be able to make sure that I can enjoy myself tomorrow.
Right.
And in
And
doing so, you make a stable sort of place for yourself.
right. And as we were having a conversation yesterday, you were saying how a lot of the time Levinas will answer in a way in which is you ask a question for Levinas and he will say yes and no in a lot of different ways. And so for people listening, some people might wonder what's so if you need to have kind of like the basic elements of life of nourishment in order to be an I, in order to be a self, in order to be able kind of like the necessary conditions to be in an ethical relation or a conversation with the other.
Hmm.
People might be wondering like, okay, so what are those basic? What counts as those basic elements that you need to have? And my guess is that Levinas is probably not going to give us any specifics.
Not in that way. He'll say that we have to be we are embodied things. And
Yeah.
in one way, classic philosophy likes to treat us as just minds in a very Cartesian sense, right? Like I am ego, I am a thinking thing, a doubting thing. I can doubt the entire existence of my body. And yet, no, I am the thing that doubts, right? Cogito ergo sum. Um, but he's
But
going to say we can't forget that we're an embodied thing, and that we have enjoyment, and that we live from things, and we
right.
savor things, and we taste things, and we feel the sun on our self, right? So there's going to be like this interiority, this psychism, this place that we craft a home from, that we live from, right? That we basically affirm that we are our own unique individual I self, that we have a life, right? And this affirmation of living from constitutes us as a unique self. And as a unique self, now that stage one is complete and we have this home, this dwelling, he'll call it, this place that we have a window to secure us. We can see out into the elements, but be protected from them. We have a door, we have a threshold, very kind of real as a house, but also metaphorical. We have a place to welcome the other from. So when the other addresses us and we're summoned and they knock on our door, from their vulnerability, as you said earlier, like lower than us, or my example, like the panhandler on the street or something, we feel in their vulnerability them being lower than us. But for Levinas, they're actually going to command and put us in the subservient position. So it's always an asymmetrical relation with the other.
Right.
But anyway, the point is, stage one, we get to have, our interiority confirmed and affirmed. We are life, and then we can accept the call of the other, stage two, and be ethical.
Right. And I guess that what I was trying to get at is, obviously you said that the home is supposed to be metaphorical and non-metaphorical. So
Correct.
if we're thinking about, say, like homeless people, or uh, can they obviously by definition they don't have a permanent home, or
Yeah,
we're just
literal
going
material. Yeah,
a
yeah.
literal, and also at the same time we cannot assume that because they're on the streets they don't have a home. Who knows, maybe they enjoy it. I've seen some young people on the streets, with their signs saying I'm homeless, whatever, help, or whatever, right? And I'm like, you're too young. And obviously I'm not saying I know that you're not homeless, that you have a family, and you probably come from an okay stable family, and it almost gives you that sense that you maybe feel like they don't have the same necessity as maybe somebody else who you can tell they've been on the streets for years. Like you can tell the difference. But in any case, if you're assuming that a lot of these people we see on the streets asking for money or whatever, riding their bicycles, whatever they do, they love bicycles. Homeless people on bicycles are like this. So anyway, can they also count as eyes, subjects that have a home that can enter into a conversation with the other?
Absolutely. The most important thing is that um, this dependence that we have. So we're dependent on the world around us, on the elemental, right? We're dependent on the world to feed us, to, sate us. We need water, right? We need to drink. We need light. We need vitamin D, right? We need the light to grow crops so that we can eat. We need to eat to live. This paradox that we're dependent on the world around us, and yet we are separate from the world around us, that we stand from the world. We are ecstatic, right? In some sort of sense, right?
Mm,
We say to near, we stand from in some sort of posture, separate. So we're dependent yet separate. And that's our sovereignty. And so basically, this way that we enjoy, you know, feeding ourselves from the element, we like the taste of bread, even though we require it. There's still something beyond it being merely a requirement. When we eat it, it tastes good, right? And, I require water, but also when I'm thirsty, it feels good to swallow, a mouthful of water. It just does. Like, so this enjoyment that we get literally leads us to having this interiority. It makes it possible. So our dependence and yet our separateness from what we're dependent upon. And that's what takes shape as interiority. And that's concretized in the, dwelling, the being at home, the chez soi. So it doesn't need to literally be a dwelling in order for you to have an interiority and be able to welcome the other into your metaphorical home.
mm,
Yeah.
I
So
like
you
that.
live, you live from and for yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
I
The
like that.
separation. Yeah.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah, that's cool. And I mean, maybe not everybody, maybe not every homeless person, but a lot of them they do build their own kind of like dwelling little units, right? Like you
Yeah,
do see a lot
yeah.
of those tents.
And labor will be key for Levinas too, because there's something about us being a body and having a corporeal nature to us, that we're exposed to the elements and yet we can use our hands. His lovely metaphor, Heideggerian hammer, what have you. But he loves the hand that grasps. So we
Mm,
can mix our labor with the elements that we're exposed to, that we're vulnerable from, and we can use that as labor to craft a shelter, right? To turn the grain into bread, to, make an aqueduct, to basically create some sort of being at home, some sort of dwelling, not a literal shelter, but to be comfortable in the world, to have the world make sense to us, for us to be able to live from the world as an interior, unique self.
right.
Yeah.
Uh, I'll just ask you really quickly a question about that Levinas and labor. And I don't want to get us too far down that road because that could be a whole other conversation, whole nother conversation for another time. Um, because the moment you start talking about labor, then you're pretty close. You're approaching the conversation of politics and or social political life, right? Uh, for a lot of us, we hear labor, and the first thing we think of as the first association is Marx, right? Marx made a big deal out of labor and how capitalism. What's wrong with capitalism for Marx is the fact that we're alienated from our labor. Uh, and someone like Hannah Arendt, I believe she will say something like, "Well, labor is to an extent one of the defining features." And I could be wrong. It's been a while since I read Hannah Arendt, but I think she says one of our defining features is, our labor, like we and enjoying the products of our labor. And so I think she integrates or she agrees with Marx that that is why that's a problem with capitalism, that you're alienated from the surplus of our labor and blah blah blah. So just a quick, how much yes or no, does Levinas follow that direction of the implications of labor for socio political life, or does he keep it just at the existential meaning of labor?
I'll 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 say this is that regardless of how labor, he will make a distinction. So we have the products of our labor. We can probably consider them to be works. So, things that we craft, right? And the works can always be appropriated in some sort of sense. And he definitely will talk about kind of how we can be merely functions for this greater totality. However, one important thing to note would be that unlike Heidegger or perhaps even Marx, where, you know, our labor and our use of tools results only in those ends, there's also some sort of enjoyment that we get from participating in labor.
Right.
So no matter what, like even like the hammer, Heidegger's tool, right, that we use to hammer
Right.
something, and we
Yeah.
only
Yeah.
it only makes sense is ready to hand, as you hand in height, and
Right.
it functions for me to do this task. It also has a weight in my hand that I enjoy. It also has a smell or a color that I feel, right? It also has memories of, building something for another person. So there's always going to be an excess. There's always going to be something that I enjoy about labor, even if I am alienated from the product of my labor.
Right. And I know I said I didn't want to go down this path, but too late. I mean, and I guess it just ties it back to the initial moment of the conversation, which is capitalism and the threat to singularity, right, or to the individual, to the existential condition of the individual, which is with automation in capitalism, right? It makes it even easier to feel removed from your labor in the sense that if all you're doing is pushing buttons and just automated machines that do all the labor for you, they're also, you kind of lose the sense of, feeling the guitar that you're building with your hands, the machine that you're building with your hands, that somebody's gonna benefit using it, right?
Oh, certainly. And I mean, that's another, great Marxian point too, when you're on the assembling line and you own
Right.
nothing of the means of production and you're so disconnected from the final product because what do? Well, you screw in three bolts on this one part of this much larger entity. You're
Right.
not a craftsman in the, very nostalgic sense of, I craft every piece of this guitar from the beginning to the end, and it takes me an entire year. And I know the person who is my literal neighbor who
Right.
will be playing it, that I will enjoy the sounds that it produces later, throughout my life.
Right.
Certainly, we're far removed from this. Yeah.
I mean, we still have that to an extent, right? But it's again, and this is the point I was saying about capitalism yesterday. Another paradox I see in capitalism, that we do have those options, but by and large, you need to pay for those. They are commodities at this point, right? Because there is made by hand.
Everything
Like,
is.
say you buy, I forget which car is it. Is it Ferraris? I think Ferraris are still made by hand, whatever that means.
Yeah, whatever that means exactly.
Yeah,
What's the
whatever.
legal definition of by hand at this point? I
Yeah,
mean, yeah.
or they make them like in such a way that it's like it takes them so long for them to build it for you. Like if you request, not that I would know, but I've heard. Well, like similar, say something I do know, maybe say guitars. Say old, not electric guitars, but like the old school acoustic guitars. There are still guitars that are made by hand by some expert craftsmen, and people that are expert musicians or whatever, that they play acoustic guitars. They will tell you, if they have the money, if they have the capital, they will choose the made by hand from the expert or whatever. And we do have those options, but sadly they're not available to most people. You need to have that capital in order to purchase those, what used to be the norm at some point, which was craftsmanship.
Yeah, and perhaps you could have enough social capital, right? Perhaps you could have real relationship with humans, and
Right.
you're an actual musician, and you happen to meet one of the makers, and they craft
Right.
something for you, and you don't pay, a dollar value for it, and you trade some other sort of capital that you have. But who knows? Yeah, that's
Right.
certainly not the majority of the way that we purchase goods now. Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely not. I mean, and it's same with like our diet, right? Like, we have to pay extra money to eat organic, to eat non-GMO and all that shit. But okay,
Started
well,
on
we'll
that.
save
That
we'll save
that could be
that.
an entire other thing. Yeah.
We'll save that for some other time. Yeah, so I think we pretty much got through a lot of the conceptual analysis of your thesis. Would you say you covered a lot of the kind of like the big points? I know you have more people. You have some mentions of Foucault. You have some mentions of Baudrillard, as you said, Zizek. But as far as like the big kind of like conceptual coordinates, more or less, we you would say we covered Levinas. You know, it's the main person we talked about, right?
I think so. I think that, in general, that's kind of his jam in totality and infinity.
And
He also
Levinas is
likes
gonna
to talk
be
about, vision and hearing. He's got
right.
a lot of big thematics that underlie, and that there's some prohibition that the face commands us to, and we can talk about violence, but by and large, the
Oh,
capitalistic side of things is definitely,
we might just have to do a second episode on the violence aspect of it, the face and the violence.
violence
Um,
is
yeah,
great.
great.
And
Yeah, we'll
that's
save that.
the second chapter will hopefully be Fight Club in my thesis, and how that's a great backdrop of violence and capitalism to see
Okay.
the other through. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's what I was gonna say. I was gonna say we got through some of the conceptual, technical work for your thesis, and I was gonna say, not that this is not fun. It's fun for us, but also there is also another layer of fun to your thesis, which is the movie, right? The film Fight Club.
Yeah.
If there's I know you just mentioned that that's going to be the second chapter. If you're not sure how you want to go about it, we can save that conversation for later. Otherwise, we can just say a few things about how you're going to be able to integrate the Fight Club into your thesis.
Sure, just a few of the hits. First off, the narrator, the main character in the movie, is unnamed, right? He's an anonymous person, and there's a big deal about naming for Levinas in Fight Club. He famously has an alter ego, right?
So
In the
sorry,
film.
can you give us like the shortest synopsis of the film, just the bare bones to for the people that are not familiar with the film.
Sure. I mean, I think largely the way that the film has been read is as a resistance to capitalism, perhaps.
Mm.
We have a main character who is kind of a cog in a big corporation, and he has insomnia, and he's experiencing the ennui of life, right?
And ennui means kind of like the boredom, the depression.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. He goes throughout life and there's nothing new under the sun, right? He's very depressed. He can't sleep. There's something missing. He has an apartment, he's got it made from capitalist standards. He's got a good job, he's got money, he's got furnishings, he can live well, right? He's got everything that you should be able to need to have a good life. But there's something missing, and he's not doing very well, to say the least. So he tries to find solutions to this.
What makes you say that he's not doing very well?
Well, he essentially starts going to therapy groups,
Mm.
because he can't connect to other
Mm.
people, at
He's
all.
not in a relationship.
He's not in a relationship.
Uh huh.
No.
Okay.
Yeah. So he can get no relief from his insomnia. He's searching for relief from his
Mm.
insomnia.
Okay.
Yeah, which is a great metaphor.
Right.
And then essentially he goes to these support groups, and he encounters this other person called Marla, who also goes to these support groups, who, like him, doesn't have any of the conditions that the people that go to these support groups have. So, they go to support groups for testicular cancer or for
Mm.
emphysema, or, things
Yeah.
like this. And neither of them have any of these conditions that the rest of the people going have.
So
Yeah.
so Marla is well off in a similar situation to him.
No, not at all. No, no, no. Her material conditions are certainly different than his. Yeah.
Okay. So she's okay.
But they both have something missing from their lives that they're trying
Mm.
to find, we'll say. But that's the ethical call for him, in the movie. that he is forced to hear to no choice of his own, and that he, through all sorts of different, increasingly violent and intense means, tries to avoid being ethical and to avoid responding. Um, he resists the ethical call. It's not that he can forego the ethical call, which is probably very, very
Right.
good sign for us. But he certainly tries his best to resist it throughout the film. Yeah, in general. So that's one of the main overarching points.
Right. And he tries to resist it by what does he do? What are some of the things that makes you say that he's trying to resist the call?
Well, in the film, he
Like, is he a piece of shit guy? It's been a while. It's been a
I
while
guess I
since I
guess I
saw the
can't
movie.
I guess I can't give away the film, or I must at this point. But he,
I
he
mean,
blows up his entire condo, right? So his home, his
yeah,
place, in a Levinasian sense, would be
yeah.
would be um the place where you would welcome the other, right?
Like,
Where you
if
would,
somebody's listening and they're like super anti spoilers,
yeah, well, oh well.
right as a time, go check out. I'm not that.
Like 20 something years old at this point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. You should have
Yeah.
seen it by now.
Yeah, but if you have a home in the literal sense, which he does, right? He blows it up. So he hears the call of the other, and he literally, gets rid of his place to welcome the other into his home. He blows it up and he runs away, and he goes and he lives with who he thinks is another person. Turns out to be his alter ego in this dilapidated place, right, with no like real address, where it seems very unwelcoming to receive another person, to be hospitable to the other here. Let's just say that.
And this
Uh,
other person is Brad Pitt with the six pack, with the
yeah,
sick
yeah,
ass
yeah.
fucking six pack.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
This is his fantasy construction of,
Right. Yeah.
in the film, very literally who he would want to be, is what he says. And perhaps in a Levinasian sense, this idea of the evil genius, or, a fantasy construction of the other person who is very, very much still within my economy and the same, so much so that they're actually just still me. It's just a projection of another person,
Mm,
so that he can feel as though he is engaging and being ethical and in conversation
right.
when he's not.
Mm.
And they famously start a fight club, right? So there's a lot of violence there. They have a very fraternal-like aspect, and later in Totality Infinity, Levinas writes on fraternity to a large degree. But this fraternal order of Fight Club is, in a lot of ways, the antithesis to the fraternity that Levinas talks about, this communal fraternity, of humanity, basically. And everything that this Fight Club fraternity does, basically abstracts the other person into just a number. Like when they turn into Project Mayhem, they get rid of their names. They all wear the same clothes. They all go through the same. They
Mm.
become, faceless, nameless soldiers. Right? It's a way of abstracting the face. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's a lot going
But
on there.
when you say there's no fraternity in the club,
Mhm.
doesn't it? Isn't that kind of like what it is, like a fraternity? Because what I remember is that they do have these like the secret society type of fraternity, like anonymous fraternity, where they're like, yeah, we beat each other up, but if I see you on the street, I'm gonna wink at you and I'm gonna be like, yeah, yeah, you're one of us, even though you're not allowed to talk about it, right? I think that's one of the rules of Fight Club. You're not allowed to talk about Fight Club.
It
So
is. It's the first three rules. Yes.
right. So in a sense, they do have some sort of fraternity, right? But it's not a fraternity where you it's not a Levinasian fraternity where you acknowledge the singularity of every single person.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It abstracts the absolute singularity of the radical other, to the highest degree imaginable, right? There's no longer any asymmetrical relation where the other approaches me from on high, in their
Right.
vulnerability and destitution. We are, equals. We are eye to eye in this very, I don't know, Buber eye thou type of relationship.
Right.
Levinas will criticize. There's this idea of responsibility, which is at the heart probably of what ethics is for Levinas, that goes out the window in the Fight Club fraternity, famously when one of their members gets shot in the head, and the idea of responsibility and of having a name comes up there. Um, yeah, so this idea of fraternity is very, very different. Yeah, very.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, I feel like if you would have never told me that you were thinking about integrating Fight Club with your analysis with your thesis, I feel like it's not really hard to see the parallels between that type of fraternity agreements that Fight Club represents and the parallels to capitalism, right? Kind of like that, the same systematic totality that aims to eliminate all differences for almost like the egocentric uh, benefit of each other. Like they're not in the Fight Club fraternity. They're not necessarily interested in like helping each other out on a particular basis. They're just there to mutually benefit from the release that they get by having this underground.
Yeah, there's
Uh,
certainly an aspect of catharsis here too that is like
right,
simulated catharsis of this, yeah, thing that we're
but
striving for. Yeah.
right, but it's very transactional. It's very
Yeah.
transactional in the sense that like they don't want to get to know each other. They don't want to know about the particulars of each other. All they want to know is just go there, get off, and then go home.
You serve your function in
Right,
the totality, the new totality that they're creating. So they're
right.
very anti-capitalism in the movie, right? Or at least that's largely how it's portrayed in the movie, and how I think many critics and many people watch the film is that this is like an anti-capitalist film and that they're resisting it. I mean, famously, they're going to their main goal at the end of the movie is to use explosives to detonate credit card companies so that they can
Mm,
eliminate and create chaos, right?
mm,
So they're trying to erase one totality, and in essence, they're fabricating, this fantasy illusion that they can create, a new order without order, a chaos. When in
mm.
fact, what they're doing is they literally have rules. They have here are the rules of Fight Club. Here are the rules of
Right.
Project Mayhem. Here is all that like so all they're doing is replacing one totality with another, right? And this fraternal order, for Levinas, I think fraternity probably like mediates between like ethics and politics. And
Mm.
what they're doing is completely taking the ethics out of the equation.
Right. They make I think that they make the naive point that someone like say like Nick Land. Nick Land is one of those famous or infamous Deleuzian and Guattari scholars. And one of Deleuze and Guattari's most famous terms or concepts is the concept of territorialization and deterritorialization. And Deleuze and Guattari they make it very specific that those two are almost similar to the logic of dialectics. Like they come in pairs. Like if you deterritorialize your an area or something, a field, that will reterritorialize itself right away. You don't ever get pure deterritorialization and then you get a blank canvas or whatever. So people accuse Nick Land of saying like artificial intelligence will just completely or capitalism deterritorializes. It just gets rid of norms. It gets rid of traditions, but it does not create new ones. And people make that criticism. They say, no, if you're a Deleuzian scholar, you always have a reterritorialization of things. You cannot ignore that aspect of it. So that's the criticism they against him in his utopic or dystopian vision of artificial intelligence. I think similarly in the film, they deterritorialize the banks, the capitalist system. They blow it up. And similar to what Zizek says, okay, in all the films we see what happens the moment of the revolution when we win.
Yeah.
But
What
I
happens
want to
tomorrow?
see I want to see what happens the day after.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. And this is not a purely theoretical conversation. We see that over and over again. These
Oh yeah.
revolutions, these moments in history. it is not over until the dust settles, and then we see
Never
how,
ever. Yeah, yeah.
yep, how is the
Always
situation
becoming.
going to reterritorialize itself. How is it that the Tunisian revolution, what happened after the revolution, in a similar way, what happens after we blow up the banks, and new forms, new shapes are going to take place, right? So that's why it's naive to think, once you get rid of a set of regimes, oppressive regimes, and then it's over. And it's one of the mistakes also of Marx, right? Once capitalism goes through its contradictions, then we get communism, and then we kind of reach this utopian state.
And we did
We
it.
we did it.
Him and Hegel, we did it. We got to the end. I think, we're done.
Yeah, yeah. That well, I think that's one of the kind of like the misconceptions about Hegel, that that there's a sense like the end of history is kind of like the completion, like the full rationalization of life, of Geist.
Yeah.
And what I've been reading, what I've been understanding lately is that for Hegel, it is not. It's almost like the opposite. It's almost like absolute knowledge means Geist understands the dialectic. Like Geist understands that there are always these motions of the dialectic that will never stop, and that that's ultimately what we need to understand.
Is
Not
that,
not
hey, we're always becoming, and that this is a
right,
process.
exactly.
And yeah,
Not
understand that we're in a process and
right,
make the best process that we can.
right.
I mean, that makes that's yeah, that's not bad.
So I think that's one of the readings of Hegel. And they say that some people have said there are two readings of Hegel. One as totality, which is something that Levinas would criticize, right? That you totalize a system and then everything fits. And there's this other reading of Hegel, which is as infinity, where the dialectic continues. And but now you understand kind of like the logic of the universe, that there's always these negations, this process of negation, blah 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 blah.
I think Levinas's issue with Hegel is more to the effect of that, like this sublation, right? Like that's
Mm-hmm.
what he calls it, sublation,
Yep.
is that where maybe that thing maintains its thingness, right? But it gets
Right.
combined, right, with the next thing. But the problem is that this is always done within like this economy of the same, or within this comprehension, right? So there's nothing outside of it. And that would
Mm.
be the issue for him. Um, this dialectic. But whatever, that's
Mm.
just an aside.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I can see that. Um, Man, no, that's really cool. I think it's really cool to include that film, Fight Club. Uh, I think it makes a really good analogy, a really good image for your thesis.
Thanks.
Even because even if we say all the conceptual work, all the technical work has been laid out, I mean sometimes your audience is so narrow. And philosophy, like I was saying at the beginning, some of us enjoy the intersections of philosophy with life, right? And what's one of the most enjoyable things about life, if not art, if not film, if not music? So and it seems to me like it's still frowned upon, to want to include film or the arts or whatever, the intersections with philosophy. But I don't understand why it's not done more often.
I don't know. So many of the great ones too. It's just what was popular cultural productions at their time were, uh, Wagner and Proust and, Aristophanes or whatever, and maybe that's different now. Yeah.
Right. Hopefully, yeah. I mean, for now, if you do something like that, you don't deserve the label of a philosopher. You're something
Whatever
else.
that means.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're something else. You're the outside. Man, that's great. I think that was a really comprehensive conversation, and really, I think we had a really good idea of your thesis and what you're trying to do with your work, and I think it's excellent. I can tell you, I I will look at the website where all the theses are posted next year, whenever your thesis is submitted, and I can go down the list of all the theses that have been submitted, and I can tell you, I'll be interested in reading one or two, and one of those is gonna be you, out of 20 in the last, I don't know, 5 years or whatever. Most of them were working on the problem of consciousness and like how is it that the existence of consciousness endures over time. Great. If that's what you're into, great. But yeah, yeah. What I'm trying to say, I think you have a really good idea, a really good, and not only is it fun with the film and the technical aspect of it, but it's really coherent and it's really also real instructive. And I think, like you mentioned before, there are some ideas that you have as far as how we can implement little practical solutions that we can take away from Levinas.
I hope so, man. Thank you. Yeah, this is a really fun conversation for two guys just talking about stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. Well, at this point, if is there anything else you'd like to say? Anything else you'd like to add? Or
I mean, not right now. That was fun, but
yeah,
we can definitely do it again. We can talk more about this. We can talk about something else. We can talk about what you're working on, whatever's
yeah,
clear. But yeah, thanks.
yeah. No, I think we can do that. Maybe we can do some of my thesis, some of my work at some point. But I'm putting a pin on this conversation for the future on Levinas and violence, or the face
Oh
of
yeah.
violence.
Yeah, yeah, we should probably talk about violence at some point, even if we just talk about violence in general. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's awesome. All right, man. Well, I'll close it here. Thanks a lot for being a guest in the very famous Abstract Machine podcast. All right, Anthony, man. That's good stuff, man. Thanks for the conversation.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.